Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge is the Game Boy sequel to Castlevania The Adventure, the Game Boy debut of the Castlevania series that forgot to emulate classic Castlevania gameplay and ended up with a plodding, sluggish mess of a video game. Hooray! Just as Castlevania II Simon's Quest served as a direct sequel to the original Castlevania on the Nintendo Entertainment System, so would Belmont's Revenge serve as a direct sequel to the original Castlevania Adventure on a monochrome Game Boy. Because, back in the day, direct follow-ups to previous games in a popular franchise still made sense. So towards the tail end of Castlevania, The Adventure, Christopher Belmont, with all the speed and agility of a sloth, somehow succeeded in defeating Count Dracula, but forgot the part about actually killing Count Dracula, who managed to survive an entire castle falling on his head. So 16 years later, Christopher Belmont's son, whose name I can't pronounce, goes missing, and it's up to the old man to come out of retirement and save his son from evil forces. He'll be doing this by venturing through 4 different castles and eventually uncovering the final castle where his son and possibly the Count himself resides. In a departure from Castlevania prior and taking a page out of Mega Man, Belmont's Revenge opens with a screen that allows you to pick from one of 4 stages or castles to play through. You play through these castles, beat the boss, and pick out the next level until all 4 levels are cleared, so you can venture through any of the 4 castles in any order you wish. It does add a bit of variety and changes things up a bit, considering there are, 16 probable paths you could embark on as a result. But at the same time, this does feel superfluous, as you really don't get anything after completing each level aside from being one step closer to the final leg of the Belmont's Revenge. It's nice to have a stage select, it's, different, but at the same time, honestly, I would have preferred a more free-roaming, open-ended adventure akin to Simon's Quest. Regardless of how you progress in Belmont's Revenge, your adventure plays out the same way. Venture through each castle, slaying enemies, navigating challenges that lay within on your way to the boss. And in the 16 years since his last adventure, Christopher Belmont has managed to gain a bit more speed and mastered a couple sub-weapons. The end result is gameplay that more closely matches traditional Classicvania gameplay, but retains elements of the previous Game Boy title, such as rope climbing and chain whips that shoot fireballs at long distances. Another thing they fixed from the previous game is the weird penalty imposed that each hit depowers your whip by 1 level. Now that penalty is mostly eliminated, with only these orbs from these snakeheads being the only thing that depowers you. So now you don't have to worry about tiptoeing along the way in order to not take a hit and get penalized for it. Now you can venture forth, take as many hits as you like, and die for the right reasons as opposed to the wrong reasons. And maybe if you're lucky you'll find pot roast hidden in the wall or something, which is something they lacked in the previous game. The previous game you had to get these hearts, would restore some of your health, and they were in candles, they were hidden long. I digress. And since the game plays more like traditional Castlevania and runs at a rather nice pace rather than on slow-mo and molasses, the challenge doesn't seem quite as high. The game's still marginally difficult, with the last couple bosses being troublesome at best, but because you're not fighting delayed controls and are better equipped to tackle the challenges before you, your jumping's a lot better, trust me. Belmont's Revenge seems easier than the previous adventure, and that might very well be the case, which is why there's a password that allows you to access the game's hard mode. And yes, Belmont's Revenge features a password system, and it's a nice and simple password system. So fake angry people that like to go on the internet and complain about password systems being too long and too complicated have one less game to complain about passwords. Hooray! I don't have to complain about the crappy password system to this game because it's actually a good password system. I might be pushing it, I'm sorry. Let's move on. Despite the fact that Christopher Belmont still looks bald, Belmont's Revenge is a definite improvement over the adventure in terms of graphics. The levels are nicely drawn with some clever visual effects applied at certain portions, such as the plant castle. The various enemies look a hell of a lot better here than they did in the first game. It just seems to be more care and detail applied to this game than the previous game. And it seems to flow much smoother and a tad quicker than before as well. A step up from the adventure without question. Likewise, the sound in Belmont's Revenge is a major improvement. The sound effects are still nothing worthy to note, but that's not a big deal. The music is a definite step up, and there are better tracks in Belmont's Revenge than there are in the previous game. And I actually like the soundtrack in the previous game, well, only a couple tunes in that game at least. Perhaps the tunes are better in Belmont's Revenge because the instrumentation used just makes them sound a touch better. Whatever the case, it's a definite step up from what came before. Overall, where Castlevania The Adventure fumbled, Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge surpasses with flying shades of monochrome, with varied level design, noteworthy soundtrack, and smooth gameplay that plays more like the NES counterparts it's supposed to spin off from. Belmont's Revenge is easily the best of the Castlevania trilogy on the original Game Boy, and can be considered almost on par with the early Castlevania games residing on the NES. If you've never had the chance to play this game way back when, you should really give Belmont's Revenge a go. It's not revolutionary or even groundbreaking, but it's a damn fine video game. Definitely worth checking out.